It is nice to be following on the heels of Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders. Um, I met Ashok Gopal, I'm told, many years ago when both of us were substantially younger. I had no idea at that time that he was going to be immersing himself in Ambedkar, in Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, one, I think, of the architects of the nation as we know it today, and one of the people who had the foresight to actually predict in many ways many of the troubles that we would be facing in our situation today. If you should be lucky enough to buy a part, you will see that it is an enormous work. It is going to be one of the most important books on Ambedkar ever because of the sheer scholarship that has gone into it. So, Ashok, I'd like you to start with the genesis of the book. You know, were you always reading about Ambedkar, or did you start with this book and then start working on it?
So thank you, Jerry, for your kind words, and thank you, KLF, for giving me the occasion to come here and speak about this book. At the outset, my purpose here is very simple. I want people to read the book even if you don't buy it, and or read anything about Ambedkar. You can start anywhere. So yeah, about the genesis of the book is like this, is that I read Ambedkar for about 10, 12 years. And at that time, I didn't really have a idea of writing a book. I was just an ignorant person learning about Ambedkar. Little late in life, but better late than never. And it was only around 2014 when I spoke to some friends. By that time, I had come to realize that there is a lot that is written on Ambedkar, especially in English, which is quite incomplete or, in fact, even wrong. So I spoke to this about some friends who are well read, and they said that you just can't sit over this like that. You should write about it. So that's how I started. It started off as a small project. It was not as big as this. But fortunately, I had a publisher who was interested from the very beginning. So and that's how through over a period of about 4 years, this book got written over several drafts. And at the end of the day, the last draft is about double the size of the first draft. So, yeah.
In the early stages of the book, you talk about the loss of so many of Ambedkar's papers, and the terrible things that happened, people storming into his house, and I think someone who was painting, putting manuscripts on the roof and then being rained on. And you say, of course, that an intellectual biography, therefore, will never be written. But this book really is an intellectual biography because you seem to have read almost everything that Ambedkar read as well.
Yeah. So maybe I was lucky that I started from ignorance. So then when you start from ignorance, then you want to learn. And ignorance, when you realize that you have been ignorant about something which is very important and you have actually been stupid. So then you make up for it by reading everything around him, whatever he has written, whatever he has read. But there have been some things which have gone for good, and we will never get them. So for example, there are a lot of letters which are gone, which would be very useful in the intellectual biography. And we know about some books he planned to write, and we have chapters of some of those books. But about the other books, whether anything was written at all, if it was written, what did he write? So we don't know. So we are actually in a blank area. So we can't really claim that we have completely understood him because there is a large part of his writing which is definitely gone for good. We will never get it. It's gone.
in comparison to, say, Gandhiji, who, is documented by two secretaries who seem to have been waiting to capture every word and
Yes.
commit it to paper, except as you point out on that really important day when Gandhiji and Ambedkar meet for the first time and Mahadev Desai isn't
Not,
there. Like, what were you doing, dude? Really? It seems, do you think it was part of the same problem that, you point out that Panditji, Nehru, writes a 650-page autobiography and never mentions Ambedkar once. Do you think it was the same problem there that, Ambedkar didn't count in that way for...
no, during his time and subsequently for a long time, anybody who stood outside the nationalist movement was a persona non grata. I mean, it is remarkable actually in a way, if you look at it, Ambedkar did get a kind of recognition he did, considering that he was so anti-Congress. So in the nationalist narrative, and that is the double-edged nationalism, so he was, that was one of the major reasons. And it was not that he was just anti-Congress. He was speaking against Gandhi and speaking against the Mahatma at that time. Today you can get away with it, but at that time it was like I mean the comparison is something like against speaking against a religious figure. So people just couldn't stomach it. And then that revulsion that comes, then you just reject that person. Then you don't consider anything about that person. In the sense, he is so against such an important figure. And people said that, how can you say such things about Mahatma? Even Nehru had objections to his language on Mahatma.
So would you like, it's very interesting that after the Pune Pact, which we had always read as Gandhi triumph, Ambedkar defeat, both Gandhiji and Ambedkar went about saying that they had won. That, both were very happy with the Pune Pact. And then Ambedkar does a complete turnaround about 5 or 6 years later.
Yeah.
He is extremely critical of the Pune Pact. So would you like to talk about what you think is that relationship between Gandhiji and Ambedkar, who now seem to have become extremely polarizing figures?
Yeah. So Gandhiji and Ambedkar, as we understand it, and so as far as Ambedkar is concerned, and I would say about Gandhiji also, these are people you take at face value. What they say, they meant it. So I at least don't think one should get into psychoanalysis and all that. Yeah, just stick to what he said. So Ambedkar started from a position of guarded admiration for Gandhi. And there are speeches like that. Subsequently, even when on around the Pune Pact and in London, they spoke. Both were ready to speak and keen to speak, and they spoke. Gandhi's way of speaking irritated Ambedkar, but he still went along with it. And Gandhi sometimes claimed to have forgotten what Ambedkar had told him and all that. So, but Ambedkar went along with that. And for a long time, he did think he never doubted Gandhi's sympathy for the untouchables. He said so. I don't doubt that at all. But his means and how far he is ready to go, on that I have different views. So, and Gandhi Gandhi recognized a genuine opponent. In fact, Ambedkar was his only genuine opponent. So Gandhi recognized an opponent, and it is to his greatness that he said, I'll talk to you. So, so it was a difficult relationship of two people who have, to some extent, the same concern. But they have very diverse views on how it should be addressed. Very, very different views. And they are separated by centuries in some respects, in some ideas. There is some indication that towards the end of his life, Ambedkar sort of reconciled himself to Gandhi. There are some suggestions like that, due to age and illnesses and all that. But all said and done, it was not a war. I mean, they were talking, and they were willing to talk, and that was that was one thing about actually all the leaders of that time. They did talk. I mean, Gandhi was talking to Jinnah also. So they did, that dialogue was always maintained, which is very different from what it is now. So,
One of the eye-opening things about this book is also the relationship that Ambedkar had with the Hindu Mahasabha, which Gandhi had with the Hindu Mahasabha.
Yeah.
And there's a letter between that Ambedkar writes to Savarkar, which we have in the book. And Savarkar also weighs in on this, on these issues. And you're beginning to think, did I read any history right? Like, did I get anything right when I was reading history in school and college?
yeah.
So, the other thing that is interesting is one is always in Bombay talked about how the natural ally of Ambedkar, who had a genuine concern for the underprivileged and for the outcast, would have been the Communist Party of India, because they were also dealing with very much the same constituency. They were that big red blot on the Congress's sweep that so upset Indira Gandhi that she paid certain cartoonists to take them down. So would you like to talk a little about Ambedkar's relationship with the Communist Party and communism?
Yeah. So there are two levels. One is on the level of ideology and one is of the practitioners on the ground. So as far as the practitioners on the ground was, at that time in Bombay, they were Savarna. The communist leadership was a Savarna leadership, Brahmin specifically, and Ambedkar, and they were indifferent to caste. And that was something that Ambedkar could not accept at all. That was number one. Secondly, that Ambedkar believed in to give primacy to caste also. So there is a certain divergence, basic divergence in thought in terms of what are the fundamental forces of change. So Ambedkar would not buy that theory of only economic factors. So on a deeper level, there were some differences. There was an alliance for a short time, like on trade union rights. Then it got disrupted by the Second World War. And when elections started, then both of them it's the same constituency. So in that kind of thing, either you need a solid alliance or somebody has to pull out. And the communists were going along with Nehru, and they worked for Ambedkar's defeat. They defeated Ambedkar. That is very clear. They worked to defeat Ambedkar. And since then, at least in Maharashtra, a large Dalit constituency has never forgiven the communists for that. So although there should be naturally, there should be an alliance, that history unfortunately still remains, the burden of history still remains.
Ambedkar also, owed an intellectual debt to his two alma maters, Columbia and the London School of Economics, where he got his doctorates from. And I think in Columbia he came, you say, in touch with John Dewey of the pragmatist school. Would you like to unpack that pragmatist for us a little?
Yeah. So one thing is, neither John Dewey nor Ambedkar used the word pragmatism. John Dewey himself never used the word. He called his philosophy something else, instrumentalism or something. And Ambedkar never used the word. So anyway, that's up front. Then, and the ordinary meaning of pragmatic has been used with Ambedkar by scholars also, saying that Ambedkar was following Dewey, so he was a pragmatist, and they use that ordinary meaning of the word. But pragmatism, Deweyan pragmatism is is a quite different thing. It's a subject by itself. But as reflected in Ambedkar's thought, it basically means that I have no absolute truth. All truth is a working truth. All truth is human constructed. Everything is religion, everything is human constructed. And I apply my mind to every problem situation without some preconceived notion of this is the right solution. And as I go along, new situations might arise. So new problem situations are. So I am in a constant experimental mode, but importantly, both Dewey and Ambedkar did emphasize, Ambedkar slightly differently, that there are certain principles which I won't leave, because otherwise it just becomes a mindless activity. So there are some principles I don't leave at all, but within that moral base, I am not dogmatic. So, so this is a, incidentally, just pragmatism of that sort has been, it has been said that Gandhi was also like that. It has been said. So,
Would you like to unpack a little that moral base, that central moral core that was
yeah,
Ambedkar, right?
yeah. So, so that moral base of Ambedkar is extremely important. It explains a lot of things. It explains his, for example, it explains finally his turn to Buddhism. It explains his, sometimes what people felt was his rigidity. I won't budge. It explains why he was sometimes a very difficult person, even to for his colleagues. He set very high standards. So being a moral person was extremely important to him, and that drove him, and that is why he valued religion so much. He was religious in that sense. Whether religion is required to have a moral base is another debate, but Ambedkar did think that it helps. So, and his moral base was all about what is it to be human. In the early, his confrontations with the Savarnas, the thing that shocked him most was not that they beat up his supporters and all that, but it was just that, look, they just went and drank water, and then you clean the tank. That means you consider them to be, you are defiling, they are not even human. So this is the thing that, I mean, then his whole idea that what are the core things that make us human? So, and that is what he stuck to, and his morality, he used in Marathi the word manuski very often. So, being moral and being human are overlapping, and it is about development of the human personality. So, democracy as a philosophical idea naturally fits into this moral frame of Ambedkar. So, that is how it is, and then since he believed that it requires also a religious support, he turned to Buddhism, which he thought was very conducive to democracy. And that is a jump which is, I personally even now have struggled to understand, saying that isn't the philosophical idea of democracy adequate? But at least Ambedkar thought, at least in the Indian context, it is not. And plainly he was right, because we are living under a democracy, but it has hardly gone into our blood. Yeah.
So, even the relationship Ambedkar had with other, you call them depressed class communities because that's the the terminology that was current at the time. So with the other DCs and the relationship that these communities now have with Ambedkar,
Right.
would you say there's a sea change there or change in any way?
So this sea change is, I think there are regional variations in the sea change. Uh, in Maharashtra, yes. But when it comes to electoral politics, no. Electoral politics ultimately, and that is electoral politics, so, and the Congress played it very well, and other parties have learned from it. So you prop up a candidate from one of the scheduled castes, then you split the vote that way, and you offer them some biscuits, some seat in some. So then you have characters like Ramdas Athavale who gets something and he's very happy with that. So this splitting for electoral purposes is deep, and it is there in Uttar Pradesh also, and wherever the scheduled caste vote is sizable. So on that level, I mean, and on Ambedkar events also, I don't think everybody participates. So that the see, the electoral politics creates its own dynamics. Demographics matter and all that. So the Mahars being a large population, there is a tendency among others to have their own candidates, and that doesn't help. So something like what Prakash Ambedkar is trying to do might be the future, but among the young people, yes, everybody reads Ambedkar, but finally when it comes to giving the vote, then it gets split so horribly that, there is no Dalit vote, so to speak. No effective Dalit vote. Certainly not in Maharashtra. Not even in one constituency. I can say this with some, I have studied that for some time. It's not part of this book, but the Dalit vote has been split systematically in every constituency.
Would you, considering the fact that Ambedkar, like Gandhiji, was very clear about women participating in the Sarwal, in the movement. But in his personal life, he seemed to have a very difficult relationship with women. Would you like to just talk about that?
So Ambedkar, like many people, most people of his time, had underwent child marriage. He spoke about child marriage, about being such a horrible thing that, at a certain early age, you are saddled with responsibilities which you can't manage at all. And Ambedkar was not the only person who had a difficult child marriage. I think we can say the same thing about Gandhi and Nehru also. So yes, and he was so highly educated. So then whom do you speak to about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who decides that he doesn't know anything about constitutional law. So he borrows 850 rupees, goes and buys books, locks himself into a room for 2 weeks, refuses to come out, and then comes out and he's like an expert on constitutional law, enough to be able to debate it and to like guide the Constitution of India. It's that kind of mind, right? I mean,
Yeah. And later, after he went to Delhi and all that, he writes about this, that because of his very personality, people would also keep away. So he actually, in the Savita Ambedkar, before he married Savita Ambedkar, he writes, I think to her also, that, I never got to know women. I never had he had a friend in England who was very close. But other than that, so after 40s, the letters speak of great loneliness. He was such a major figure, but he lived a very lonely life for a very long time.
except that he had a very, very lovely relationship with books, which he
Yes.
said were,
Better than they are mean more to me than my family.
exactly. I mean, so he was, and he, as someone who I think like genuinely invested in his mind,
Yes.
genuinely, sort of like reached out to the world by reading as much as he could. He ended up with like three huge libraries, which are still available to all of us. But really, unfortunately, as you point out, we don't know what he read. We have no lists of, so that intellectual biography is not going to ever happen. Uh, would you care to share something about your understanding of Ambedkar's economic policies? His attitude to the Mahar Vatan, for instance.
Yeah. So uh, it appears there is on economic policy, the document that is taken, given great importance is the memorandum he submitted to the Constituent Assembly, which has a straightforward, it looks like a socialist agenda. But of course, even there, if you read carefully, it is not all the way going towards the left, because he says that compensation should be paid for land acquisition, which is not a idea that Marxists would accept. So, but he did believe in a welfare state. He did believe in a dominant role of the state, not only in economic matters, but also in social matters, which is where he differed from with other people, including, of course, the British government, who didn't want to play a part in social and religious issues. So a dominant state, a theory of a dominant and powerful state, which is a very today, as we know, is a very debatable idea. But nevertheless, he did believe in that. Uh, but other than that, as far as socialism itself is concerned, he agreed that it should not be put in the constitution, and his statement should be taken as face value. He is saying that who are we to say for all generations to come that this is the best answer? As far as
And
the constitution is concerned, let's keep it open. Let people think, and the world will keep changing. And he, of course, believed there is no finality to thought. So he would not be tied by that ism.
it should be noted that the preamble, which in its beauty and its poetry is often attributed to Ambedkar's work, the words socialist and secular, neither of which we are today, it seems, in practice, were introduced much later by Indira Gandhi's Congress government. So, reading your book, and I really would advise all of you to purchase a copy of this book simply because it is so deeply worked and so rich in texture. Because I find Ashok Gopal following Ambedkar as he occupies one difficult position after another and staying there, occupying that position though he has to walk past angry Mahars who are enraged that he will not support a general strike, or taking up positions saying, I will not support the national movement until I am assured that the depressed classes will have a say in the future of this country. Otherwise, who is it going to be independent for? Only for the Savarnas. So would you like to talk about this really difficult man and the difficult positions he takes up and defends with such honesty and integrity?
Yeah. So that is again relates to his moral core, on which he was inflexible. So, I mean, in sometimes in a certain way, I mean, their moral ideals were different, but in sometimes you see some things like that in Gandhi also. But yeah, so he would not. It was not that he was a pragmatist in terms of policy. So, for example, he was ready to take what the Pune Pact was giving at that time, saying that let's work this out. Let's see how it comes. So even with the Constitution, it was like, okay, many times in the Constituent Assembly, he says like, okay, we have to come to something, so let's go with this and let's see what happens. So it was not that he was a extremely what you call dogmatic in terms of public policy, but on his moral core, he just wouldn't bend. And even if it meant hurting people close to him, he would say what he felt. He could be extremely blunt. Even in his private letters to his associates, he plainly tells them that there are some other letters which I have not cited where he is saying that you guys are bad people. You are not a good person. He tells these people, so he makes these, he has a sense of there is good and there is bad. And I will draw that line and I give a damn. So, and that's that's a tough person to live with.
So what happens with the Hindu Code Bill then? I mean, because at that point he is really adamant.
Yeah. Now, in the Hindu...
just explain the Hindu Code Bill.
Yeah. So, the Hindu Code Bill is complicated. Firstly, contrary to some people's idea, he is not the architect of the Hindu Code Bill. The Hindu Code Bill was already there in process under British rule, and it was an attempt to codify different aspects of Hindu law, which had got confusing because of conflicting judgments. So it was a technical exercise. In this technical exercise, two factors come into the picture. One, it is led by a anti-Congress, anti-Savarna law minister. So therefore, there is this huge opposition. Then there is a fairly innocuous provision allowing divorce among Hindus. Divorce was already happening among Hindus. But to make it legal, so a lot of people got worked up with it, Savarnas, and they said, you are going to destroy the Hindu family and all that. And then there was a part which is about inheritance laws and all that, which in retrospect, as we know, was not at all radical. And in fact, the Hindu law is still quite not very favorable to women. And feminists have attacked Hindu code bill on that itself, that it was not at all a progressive legislation. Of course, it was a step forward for what was there earlier. Ambedkar's interest, however, was in the Special Marriage Act. An act like that existed earlier, but a much stronger act came, and he himself, he got married before this act came into the force, which basically allows Hindus of any caste to marry. And he thought that, intercaste marriage in this way could be a dissolvent of caste eventually. So for all these reasons, he was really staunchly for the Hindu code bill. But when he realized that, basically when Nehru himself was not willing to back it, and there was one factor definitely and it has to be accepted, that the Congress had not won the mandate through a general elections till then. So, and Nehru strategically decided to postpone it, that let me win the 52 elections, and subsequently, of course, it got passed. But yeah, so Ambedkar's interest, he makes it quite clear. It was the Special Marriage Act, and the fact that, he was not so much about it. He was, I think, a little surprised why they are getting so hacked up about divorce. And the inheritance, I think that part, the property part and all that, it was anyway it was not all that progressive. Yeah, but the narrative about he left because of that, doesn't really, that's not the full picture, because even in his explanation he tells that is not the only reason he left. He had other reasons to leave also.
Would you like to add something about Ambedkar's attitude to Muslims in India?
Yeah. So as far as Ambedkar's attitude to Muslim, the book that is used by the Hindutva brigade is Thoughts on Pakistan, and its later edition called Pakistan or the Partition of India. So there are passages where he criticizes the Muslim leadership of his time, and he criticizes the lack of reform in Muslim society. And so that way, if you just look at it, just take it from there itself, you may say, like some people are saying, he was anti-Muslim. But those people who are picking out those passages don't realize, number one, what is the book about? The book is saying the demand for Pakistan is legitimate. It has to be taken seriously. How could a person who is sort of anti-Muslim say such a thing? He said the demand for Pakistan is legitimate and should be taken seriously. He didn't say that Pakistan is the only option. But we have to take this demand seriously, and we have to, so that is why he wrote the book. So obviously he couldn't have been an anti. He wanted reform in all sections of Indian society, including Muslim society. So that was his position. As a matter of fact, in his movement at that time, there were no Muslim leaders. But then actually that way, that was not that, because at that time the recognition of caste among Muslim society was not very deep. And anyway, Ambedkar himself was fighting hard to create just this constituency of Hindu untouchables, so which was itself being divided. So yes, that is it. Minority rights was very close to his. He said ultimate test of a democracy is how it treats its minorities. That is the ultimate test. So this explains his, yes, using his typical harsh language, he said that Muslim society is in urgent need of reform. And there are a lot of things there that are unacceptable. He said this, and it is there in print. So I am not saying anything which is like, not published and around for the last 30 years or more.
Again, just harking back to the Pune Pact, there is a moment when, in some ways, by reading your book, I recognize what Ambedkar must have felt when he said it's a victory. Because for the first time, there was some admission that these people could have a say now in the workings of the new country. But suddenly the question arises, who are these people? Which ones of them are going to be considered the depressed classes? And that leads us to the troubled questions of naming and enumerating and assigning, sort of weightages to the depressed classes, which is something that even haunts us today.
Right. Yeah. So naming and counting the depressed classes was a big task and a big priority which actually was undertaken by the colonial government. And they had a practical reason, in the sense, if you're going to give them seats, then you need some numbers. You need, seats are numbers, so when you have a number there, you need a number here. So, and anyway, the British were very fond of counting, in general. They counted everything, trees, tigers, coconuts, everything they counted. They were great counters. So, counting was very important. And so they went with great zeal to count. And then they faced some basic problems like, see, caste, to an extent, is a fluid phenomenon. To an extent. Because it is a chameleon. So I can change colors according to my situation. And boundaries were, at a certain level, boundaries were not very rigid. And the relations could also change. So therefore, in one geography, a certain caste is treated in a particular way, but say 100 kilometers away, that caste doesn't suffer that kind of discrimination. So while you could, so both naming and counting becomes complicated, because when it is going simultaneously. I say that, so XYZ caste, there are so many of them. But now if this XYZ caste is not treated as XYZ caste in another area, then should they be called XYZ there at all? So these complexities came, and what test to apply, and Ambedkar had some suggestions. And ultimately, what was a bureaucratic creation. Ultimately, it was a bureaucratic creation done with all kinds of things. So here, for example, in the south, a lot of castes which would have been considered untouchable according to the criteria they had used in, say, Western Maharashtra, were removed, simply saying that if you include all of them, there will be too many of them. So, and the untouchable caste were not so organized that time to protest against all this, and the importance of all that was also not very highlighted at that time, because after all, it was a restricted franchise. Indians had no real power. So what are you fighting about? So these things got magnified much later. Today the SC list is frozen. It has remained frozen, and the ST lists are contested. But that problem that remains applies to OBC also. So that naming and counting and what criteria to apply, those issues remain live, including the issue of how much importance should be given to the matter at all. Yeah.
So, when I was reading about our history in college, one of the things that we were always told was that democracy was supposed to only survive in countries which had a high education status and which had money. Basically, rich, educated countries could be democracies, and therefore our democracy was supposed to fail. And then we had the first elections, and Indians proved brilliantly that we understood the power of the vote, we understood the symbolic value of the vote, and your book tells me that the first electorates were about as blood-stained as anything that we know later. The booth capturing, the violence, people writing letters saying, don't let them win even one seat. Would you like to talk about that a little?
Yeah. So, actually, the electoral politics starts from the 37 elections itself, where money power comes into a big play, caste comes into the picture to selection of candidates. The number of candidates runs into thousands. at least among the Congress. Even Ambedkar had a problem selecting candidates. People got unhappy. Although there was nothing,
Again, he selected people who were educated
could speak English.
and could speak English. He wasn't going with his friends, even if they'd been with him for 20 years. He was going to choose
Yeah.
intelligent, well-read people because that's the kind of leader he thought should be in parliament. Never mind if they were going to lose the election.
So from 37 itself, elections were a big thing. And Ambedkar, the first election he contested, yeah, he won, but it was a pretty close shave. Basically, I calculated that it's because the Savarnas didn't come out to vote, and that's why he won. And subsequently, so then the 47 and 46 was the election taking to the Constituent Assembly. He didn't participate in that election at all. The writing was on the wall. The Congress was going to win hands down because of, the British were anyway on the way out. And the Congress was the party that has, the nationalist part, taken us to the freedom movement. So 52 elections. Around the violence and all that you're talking about is around in 46, where they wanted to crush this phenomenon once and for all. But then later, when the constitution making comes and all that, then as Ambedkar says that, look, they needed somebody as knowledgeable as him. And he was interested. He was interested in contributing. So in the 52 elections, that the time when he lost, he was actually, initially he thought that they will not put a candidate against him. But they were, at least the provincial Congress in Bombay, they didn't care for his stature there. He said, we have to defeat this man. So they found a Chambar candidate whom their Chambar constituency they had cultivated. He was a relatively unknown person, and with great help of Comrade Dange, they defeated Ambedkar. It was a real stab in the back. I tried to read a lot about what Nehru had to say about this, but it looks like Nehru really didn't have a say in the selection of candidates in many parts of India. But I don't know. I mean, so yes, and then subsequently all elections, Ambedkar simply didn't win an election. It was only after he passed away that, because of the state reorganization committee and all that thing, and the Samyukta Maharashtra movement, so the Scheduled Caste Federation allied, and on that they rode and they got their best performance ever. After that, the Dalit vote has never counted so much in Maharashtra since 57. Yeah. So electoral politics, he was certainly no master at that. And he didn't have people who figured that out and how it is to be done. Electoral politics is a whole organizational and management issue by itself. And it requires almost, you could say, hired professionals. And he didn't have that. And he was himself not capable of doing that. It was not something that interested him,
At various points, he seems really disinterested in this public role. He keeps saying, I just want to read, or I'm going to stop this and go do my law practice. He seems to be a very reluctant statesman.
Yes. So that is the thing, It is like this, when you are born in a particular life situation and you know that you can make a difference, then you have no choice. So he says this also, I can't leave you people. I have no choice. And he accepts it also. He doesn't complain about it. But that frustration is there, no? That actually I am also interested in doing all these other things. And I want to write so many books, I want to read some, but I carry this burden. And I think that is something, for example, I mean, it is one of the things that struck me reading about him, that, that I can speak for myself that I have never felt this burden, that I have to do something because of the position that I am in. I have felt like, I can do whatever I want. But that, no, that you are in a particular juncture and from a particular social background, you simply have to carry this burden. Uh, so he was frank enough to say sometimes that this burden is, uh, it hurts me. But he never unburdened in himself, but he was frank enough to say that, this is I would also like to do other things.
Before we open out for questions, I'd just like you to read that section from page 730 about the Dhamma of democracy.
I am a terrible reader. 730. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the part where Ambedkar says he is a Buddhist. He studies Buddhism for a long time. He does undergo a conversion a private conversion in Delhi, and he then from 52 onwards, he talks a lot about Buddhism. And he's deeply immersed in Buddhism. He has studied a lot. And he comes to a point where he himself wants to write a book on the Buddha, saying this is what Buddha originally meant. So and there has been a lot of stuff put into it. So he takes the daring step of saying that I am reading Buddha as Buddha would have meant. So therefore, and he has a principles that he says that, Buddha followed certain principles. So according to that, this is what he would have said. So then he takes it forward. He takes it forward for Dhamma in our current age. So in our current age, if Dhamma, so to make the world a kingdom of righteousness, Dhamma was necessary. But it was not adequate. It had to become Sadhamma. That could happen when learning is open to all, when learning leads to prajna, which is wisdom, not pedantry, when prajna is guided by sila, which is morality, and when sila is driven by karuna, which is compassion, and when compassion becomes maitri, which is loving kindness towards all living beings, when all social barriers are pulled down, when worth and not birth is the measure of man, and when equality becomes a lived faith. So this is his final, you could say edicts of Ashoka, this is the edicts of Ambedkar, final, yeah.
It's a lovely thing when you say worth, not birth.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Now, if there are any questions, could you put your hands up, please, and we'll get a mic over to you. Yes, sir.
Ashok sir, you just mentioned that discrimination varies from geography to geography.
Yes.
It's very true, sir. I am coming from the southern part of Kerala, but in northern part, when I come here, there are a lot of tremendous kind of color discrimination from southern to northern. My question is regarding the BJP bandwagon now says that there was no caste system, only division of labor. So another point is, could you please elaborate on graded inequality as put forth by Ambedkar?
Yeah. So graded inequality is one of Ambedkar's brilliant insights. I mean, this is the kind of thing that sociologists should have come up with it. He was not a professional sociologist. Caste was being studied, there were sociologists studying caste, but nobody identified that this is the essence. It's graded inequality, which is very different from simple inequality where there is a oppressor and the oppressed. Here, everybody gets a chance to be an oppressor. And except for the person on top, everybody is at some time or the other, in some way or the other, the oppressed. So graded inequality is one of his very brilliant insights. Uh, and so that was, so, so that is how, vertically that's how it works. In terms of the horizontal divisions, in the sense that within the geography, discrimination varies. Ambedkar would certainly have been aware of that, but he strategically didn't want to play that up because it was very important for him to get the maximum number of seats he could obtain under reservation. So if you make gradations like that, then the seats you can demand, your bargaining point becomes weaker. So that is one aspect that he didn't talk much about. But he was very much aware of it, and he spoke about it even to his own constituency, Mahars, because that division was also, there was a division between Konkan Mahars and Desh Mahars, the people from the coastal side and from the Deccan Plateau. So, and that irritated him a hell of a lot. And so he, in the speeches in Marathi, he has spoken against that also. I have mentioned that in one of my references. Yes.
Hello. Sir, Baba Saheb Ambedkar was a man who dreamt of equality. Once he said, equality may be a fiction. Nonetheless, one must accept it as a governing principle. It was on this ground that he had advocated state socialism. Can you elaborate what was meant by him in advocating state socialism and why he failed in incorporating this state socialism in the Constitution of India?
Okay. So as far as state socialism, I have already answered. He did think that the Constitution of India should not be such a document that it binds, that it gives a economic direction. So he said, I mean, on socialism, who knows after 50 years, he had an open mind. So he said, after 50 years, there may be something else around. So let's not put it in the Constitution. He did say it. I have cited it. And we have to take it as face value. He did try in the beginning, but when the overall, Nehru himself didn't push for it. And when Nehru was not pushing for it, then where did he have a chance? After all, the Constituent Assembly was dominated by the Congress. So, and finally, and even the Scheduled Caste Federation first election manifesto, it does not say for state socialism. It says, in fact, we are open to anything that works. So I would not go very high on that part of that he was committed forever to state socialism. On equality, it is a very difficult, it's a very problematic concept philosophically, and Ambedkar grappled with it, because it is quite difficult to justify. On equality of what, equality when, so all that, and especially when you want to also justify positive discrimination, then it is equality is among the four ideals in the constituency, in the preamble. Equality is the most problematic, and he struggled with it. Even in Buddha and Islam, he struggles with the concept, and he finally says that we have to go with it. But he had a struggle with it, with equality, because there are many issues why he had a struggle with it. I don't think we have the time for that. But yes, I have noted it because he himself says it, that he had to struggle with equality. It's a difficult concept, philosophically.
Hi, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session. Yeah, it's here.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask a question about the last, about the conversion to Buddhism that Ambedkar did. Now, this act of conversion was not personal, was not just personal to Ambedkar, right? It was also part of his activist life. Now, if I bring your attention to Tamil Nadu, where if I look at Periyar, for example, who was who led, again, he was also a social reformer, but his movement, if I look at the self-respect movement, it was based on reason. He was a staunch rationalist. Now, my question is, has Ambedkar ever, acknowledged these differences he has with Periyar? Or, I mean, maybe not just differences. Has he ever, cited or has he ever talked about Periyar in his writings?
Yeah. So in the 20s, definitely Periyar was following Ambedkar, and Periyar's papers report what is happening in Maharashtra. So he was following that, but he also saw what the Justice Party did when it came to power, and he saw what happens in the sense he says that also that ultimately. It's a party of, I mean, landlords want cheap labor, so we are going to get discriminated anyway. So, and that was one of the actions of the Justice Party when it came to power. So he spoke about that. Then there is no connection with Periyar for a very long time till Periyar comes to Bombay. Ambedkar goes with him. Ambedkar also meets Periyar in Madras, in Chennai. But no kind of alliance was emerging. Ambedkar valued religion, so there was one basic difference there. And on the other issues like Dravidian identity and all that, Ambedkar was simply not bought by that. So, so there were fundamental, what you call, they were in two different spaces. They were in two different spaces. Yeah.
Sir, I have to say thank you for this session. This was so informative for me. I myself am a political science student, so this has been a truly good learning experience for me. Coming to my question, you explained how both Gandhiji and Ambedkar worked towards removing untouchability and worked for the Dalits and all. And you said they in some way considered each other as their opponent. And it's mostly because of how they approached it differently. Could you elaborate more on how they approached the struggle differently?
Yeah. So, well, one thing is you'll have to read the book and you have to read Ambedkar. Unfortunately, there is no substitute to reading and there is no substitute to reading Ambedkar. So, there are no nuggets. But anyway, to give a short answer which might help you in your reading, Gandhi was not willing to disturb the social order. He did think there some social order is required and he could not, it appears that he could not think that there could be any other kind of social order. So Gandhi, and therefore Gandhi saw merit in Chaturvarna. And Ambedkar simply would not see that how can you defend such a thing. So there was that fundamental difference with it. And there is some suggestion that towards the end Gandhi changed his views on Chaturvarna. But even so, it is not some kind of a complete sea change. So that is one basic Chaturvarna. One of them wants to hold Chaturvarna, the other one says, to hell with it, forever. Erase it, annihilate it, nothing of that should remain. So when you have that fundamental difference, then even if you have some common grounds, you are going to fight at some point. So that's what happened. But as I said, they maintained the dialogue and they recognized the differences. And one of the last letters of which I have cited is of Gandhi to Ambedkar saying that, I have realized to my great, Gandhi blames himself, that I have realized to my great sorrow that I have not been able to, talk with you, or what does he say, something, communicate with you. We remain differences. And that is, Gandhi says it is my failing. That was Gandhi. So.
And for me, the takeaway is that while democracy lives because of dialogue, it also lives because we must continue to listen to each other. Thank you all very much for being a wonderful audience. Thank you, Ashok, for a lovely book.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, KLF, for having us here.
Thank you.